Hey guys, and thank you for sitting in on my recording over here. The paper that I've been working on putting together is that I just came to title Understanding Due Process, Privacy Rights, and Parental Rights. The main reason I'm putting this together is because, just to be honest, I don't feel like I know enough about it. As a music teacher that teaches pre K to 5 music, I don't really get to sit down very much for IEP meetings or 504s or sitting down and seeing the process. So I wanted to just make sure that I had a general idea over the process and how it's put together, not just from a administrative standpoint, but also as a teacher standpoint and even a parental standpoint, so that if any questions come up to me, I can feel comfortable at least entertaining the ideas of what they would like to know. These protections that I'm talking about, due process, privacy, parental rights, all that stuff, are essential for ensuring fair treatment, safeguarding student information, and promoting parental involvement in educational decisions. There are three main areas of protection in special education: due process, privacy rights, and parental rights. These rights are guaranteed by federal laws, such as the Individual with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. The goal I was hoping to have today is to explore what these protections actually mean and why they're important and how we can utilize them. First of all, what is due process? Well, due process is a legal safeguard that ensures students with disabilities receive fair treatment. It requires schools to follow specific procedures when making decisions about a child's education. This includes identifying the disability, evaluating students, determining placements, and making changes to IEPs as deemed necessary. So, how does that apply to further into education? Well, due process provides a legal mechanism for resolving disputes between parents and schools. If disagreements arise regarding a child's education, both parties have rights, including a formal hearing process, an impartial hearing officer, the ability to appeal decisions, and of course, required documentation. There are some key elements of due process. Due process includes several critical protections, including written notice of educational decisions and parental participation in all major decisions, impartial hearings when disagreements occur, the right to appeal a decision, and of course, documentation requirements to ensure transparency. Now, when is due process something that you should pull out of the shelf and when it's actually like required to use? Well, there's a couple of situations. When you're dealing with the identification of a disability, when you're during evaluation procedures, during educational placement decisions, during changes to an IEP, disciplinary actions affecting placement. Now, one thing I was curious about is what kind of things cause due process hearings, what special needs usually spark them. Is there a commonality in that stuff? And according to my research, here's some things that I found. Most due process cases involve placement. 25% involve placement decisions. 24% involve IEP appropriateness. 12% involve assessment procedures. 11% involve eligibility determinations, and then the rest fall under just behavioral interventions. Why do these issues arise in due process? Like, why are these the most common in due process hearings? Well, often parents and schools have different perspectives on what services a child's needs, which I'm sure most of you, being homeroom teachers at one point in your careers, have probably run into that once or twice. Um, so, Another one I noticed was the most common disability categories in due process. The most frequent disabilities involved in due process cases, 26% involve specific learning disabilities. That could be ADHD or dyslexia or anything of that sort. 20% of them involve autism. or something along the spectrum. 15% are other health impairments of some sort, and 13% are emotional disturbances, or ED. Why might these categories have higher rates of dispute? Well, often these are the ones, these four, require the ones that individualize services that may be difficult to agree on between the parents and the schools. All right, so then another one I looked into was, where does the initiation of a due process hearing usually come from? Well, in 85% of the cases, in 85% of cases, I apologize, it is parents. Parents usually are doing it, and it's usually just to challenge a school's decision. And then in 50% of the cases, there are actually cases where the school challenges the parents. And in those cases, it is usually when the parents are refusing some kind of service that the school is highly requesting. Now, of course, with all that, what is the outcomes of these hearings in most cases? Well, in about 59% of these cases, schools actually end up prevailing. So in most cases, the school wins. In 30% of the cases, parents do win. And in 10% of the cases, it is a rare case of a split decision. Now, what usually determines these or influences these outcomes are the strength of the evidence, documentation provided by the parents of the school, and legal representation, which all of this plays key roles. So let's move on to privacy. So we talked about uh, 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 um, due process, but now let's move on to privacy rights. So privacy rights in education are protected by FERPA, which ensures that students' records remain confidential and are only accessible to authorized individuals. Now FERPA provides various student privacy rights, including protection of educational records, confidentiality requirements, and parental consent for information sharing. Um, FERPA also covers other things such as academic records and grades, medical health records, behavioral reports, special education documents, and assessment results. Now, who has the right to access these records? Well, obviously the parents or legal guardians do have the right to access the records. School officials with legitimate educational interest. Now, that falls into an interesting category. So, legitimate educational interest, it can't just be any school official. It has to be someone that is directly connected. Other schools where the student is enrolling, and specified officials for audits or evaluations in those circumstances. Um, Parents must provide written consent before schools can do the following things: conduct an initial evaluation or placement, perform reevaluations, make changes in placements, or release records to third parties. Now, what kind of rights do parents have? Parents have some various rights for this stuff. They have the right to participate in educational decisions, access their child's educational records, request independent evaluations, receive prior written notice of changes, and challenge school decisions, as we've mentioned in the past. Um, so parents also can attend all IEP meetings, provide input on decisions, review and revise IEP goals, request additional meetings, and participate in placement decisions. Now, if parents aren't involved, there are advocates for those students, and that could fall into different areas. Advocates can include obviously parents; they could be educational advocates as well, and legal representatives that can advocate for the student as well. Seeking advocacy support can be helpful when navigating disputes within schools, which is something to keep in mind. There are multiple ways to resolve conflicts. So if there ever is an issue that arises, as an educational leader, there's some different things that you can try before you go into legal hearings. You can have informal meetings. You can have mediation services to help out with it. You can have, and then of course there's the due process hearings, and then there's state complaints. So there are multiple options for ways to do this, and it allows for more flexible and less adversarial decisions. There are some strategies to help with due process disputes, and also these can also fall into place of like prevention. One of them could be clear communication channels, making sure you're having a clear communication with every step of the process, and make sure you have intervention early intervention in conflicts, regular and parental conferences, and documented attempts to resolve issues, making sure that you understand that there is a paper trail going for that you have, so that you have something to show. And of course professional development for the educators, so that educators are knowledgeable in the specific needs of your school. So understanding these rights empower parents and educators to work together for the best outcome. So far, and one thing I just like to say, collaboration is key. Working together and going back and forth. So let's talk about some more detailed stuff, like for example, mediation processes. There are different kinds. There's voluntary processes. There are neutral third-party mediators, confidential discussions, no co- and make sure things are no cost to parents, and legally binding agreements, which are all fall under that category. Um, there are due process rights, hearing rights, which parents have the right to various things: present evidence, cross-examine witnesses, receive a written record of proceedings, obtain a written decision within a specific timeline, and the right to an attorney or an advocate. So these are things that parents have the right of. Um, there are some confidentiality protections, including securing storage of records, limited access to authorized personnel, written consent for disclosure, records of access, records of access maintained. I apologize. Regular privacy training for staff. Um, so there are some best practices when it comes to documentation, things that you want to make sure it happens. Make sure you keep copies of all communications, especially if you know there's going to be a legal issue possibly coming up. Is especially important to make sure you document everything: phone calls, emails, all that stuff. Document meeting dates and decisions. Maintain organized records, and follow up with things in writing. This stuff is important because it helps support due process cases and protects parents and students' rights. So overall, it helps all around. Um, Understanding these rights empower parents to be strong advocates. However, rights come with responsibilities. Schools and families must work together for the best outcomes. So if I ever had a parent come up to me and ask me like what kind of resources or where parents can find help in case they need help, they can go to parent advocacy groups. There's special education lawyers that they can consult. State education departments usually have some people that can answer questions, and of course various online resources. Um, so thank you very much for your time, and for all this. Oh, and by the way, if you guys are curious about where I went for my resources, so here's a list of my resources that I did for the presentation. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope this was informative.